This edition of Monocle on Saturday was first broadcast on the 21st of September 2024. Hello, I'm Georgina Godwin, broadcasting to you live from Midori House in London. This is Monocle on Saturday. Coming up on today's programme, we'll have a look through the week's news and culture with author and political journalist Tessa Szyszkowitz. Plus,
so we really started low-key and we asked some people like, what do you think about connecting design in Amsterdam? And everyone said, oh, I'd like to have it yesterday.
Monocle's Mae-Li Evans heads to Amsterdam for Glue Design Festival. And Andrew Hill, senior business writer for the Financial Times, reflects on the 20th edition of the Business Book of the Year Award. That's all ahead here on Monocle on Saturday. First, though, here's the news. Israel killed a top Hezbollah commander and other senior figures in the Lebanese movement in an airstrike on Beirut on Friday, vowing to press on with a new military campaign until it's able to secure the area around the Lebanese border. Authorities say Ibrahim Akil had been killed with other senior members of an elite Hezbollah unit in the airstrike, sharply escalating the year-long conflict between Israel and the Iran-backed group. Millions of Sri Lankans are casting their votes today to select a president who will face the task of bolstering the South Asian country's fragile financial recovery. This is the first election since Sri Lanka's economy buckled in 2022 under a severe foreign exchange shortage, leaving the Indian Ocean island nation unable to pay for imports of essentials, including fuel, medicine and cooking gas. And Australia's Prime Minister Anthony Albanese said today that he's confident the AUKUS Defence Pact will be supported by any future US administration after a meeting with President Joe Biden that covered bilateral defence cooperation in the Indo-Pacific. And that's your Monocle Radio News. Hello and welcome to Monocle on Saturday. Tessa Szyszkowitz, who is an author and the UK correspondent for the Austrian weekly magazine Falter, is here. Good morning to you, Tess.
Good morning.
It's lovely to have you here. You have got elections coming up in Austria next weekend. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. Plus, Germany's got regional elections coming up too. That's all very important. But our top story, of course, is what's going on in Gaza and indeed now in Lebanon too. Now, the New York Times has got a very good piece about how we shouldn't speak about collateral damage when children die in conflict zones. Tell us more about this piece.
Well, as you know, now that the entire civilian population in Lebanon cannot be sure anymore if they, pick up a phone or, try to get a toast out of a toaster, that it won't blow up in their faces. I think that's a shift also in this war in the Middle East, which is not a full-blown war yet, but sort of really puts a lot of pressure on everyone's and on the diplomatic scene. But it has its toll on the civilian populations. And the last year, since October 7th, these atrocities against civilians are really a daily occurrence. And just to highlight maybe three names. So in Lebanon now, a 9-year-old called Fatima Abdullah was killed in the pager attack last week. She handed her father the pager that killed her while she sort of handed it over to him. But there are all these other terrible, terrible tragedies. Like you remember maybe Hind Rajab in Gaza. She was this 5-year-old girl who was in a car that was hit by an Israeli rocket a few months ago. And she was still talking on the phone to her relatives until she died, alone between her already dead relatives in the car. An incredible image of tragic, civilian collateral damage is, and it's a name that always makes my hair stand up if you think that this is supposed to be something that happens in a war. And then you, of course, on October 7th, an Israeli baby was kidnapped and brought to Gaza, Kfir Bibas, who then turned 1 on January 1st, 2024 in captivity. But by that time, we have to assume that he was probably already not alive. So all these human stories that we have to keep telling, I think, to make people understand that you cannot just bomb civilians, you cannot just attack civilians in wars on all sides, and people should really try to find a diplomatic solution instead of a violent one.
But of course that's not happening, is it? I mean, we know that ceasefire talks continue in Egypt, but it's looking extremely unlikely, particularly with this new front in Lebanon.
Yeah, the ones that you need this ceasefire deal in Gaza, most are, of course, the civilians, but also the Biden administration and Kamala Harris to have better chances to win in the U.S. elections. But it seems that some of the people who have to agree to it, like the Israeli government, for example, or Hamas, are not necessarily interested in getting this deal, because that would mean that their power structures will be questioned after this disaster of this war, which made everyone poorer and in a more devastating situation, and there are really no gains in this entire situation.
I mean, it's now acknowledged that it's unlikely for there to be any kind of ceasefire before the election. I was completely amazed by Donald Trump's speech to an anti-Semitism conference, where he says, if I lose, the Jewish people will have a lot to do with it. And it just seems an extraordinary tack to take.
I mean, it's just a pretty threatening thought that he would take over the reins again of Middle Eastern politics, because I don't think that you can by now have a one-sided approach to helping one side in this conflict, because so much has happened also in this year, which shows that the extremists in the Israeli government and the extremists on the Palestinian side, namely Hamas, are sort of really pushing for very, very violent solutions. And, you know, the international community just has to try to calm the waves. And that's actually what's also happening. You know, the European Union and also the US administration is trying to get the situation into a little bit more calmer waters and prevent now also the war on the northern front to becoming a full-blown war. And that's, you know, what is a full-blown war? I mean, people are being bombed in the last days in Lebanon, and in the north of Israel, people have been evacuated from their homes already for months. So it looks very much like a war already now, but it has not become on the international scene a full-blown war, because Iran has not actually engaged fully and just let the proxy armies fight for them. So it's a very, very, very sensitive and very, very dangerous situation we are in now.
Do you think that this is with these exploding devices, is this a new front in modern warfare, that this whole sort of opening up of this cyber front, if you like?
Well, I was a correspondent in Jerusalem in the early 90s, where some of the enemies of Israel were eliminated by this sort of extrajudicial killings, which didn't happen in courtrooms or on the battlefield, but by devices, so a mobile phone blowing up. That's why Hezbollah went back to the pagers of the 80s, because they thought they were safer than mobile phones, not so easy to track and not so easy to infiltrate. And cleverly, the Mossad managed to do that, but it might backfire, because if nobody is safe anymore, nobody really is safe anymore, and it might also turn against Israeli civilians everywhere in the world. I mean, it's a super, super dangerous thing to do.
And the implications for things like air travel are enormous.
Well, enormous. And also the question is if we still have a kind of international law framework that we are trying to adhere to or not. So if you look at what happened now at the UN special meeting last night, where Volker Turk, who is the happens to be Austrian but he's the UN's High Commissioner for Human Rights, and he said it's a really dangerous situation if all these civilian lives could be endangered and that could be seen as a method of war, because in fact it could be considered a war crime if you turn pagers, telephones, and things that are sort of civil engineering things into weapons. And so we have to be very, very careful that we don't destruct our entire system of what international law is calling us for, and the behavioral limits are being pushed further and further, so that you can actually kill little girls and then afterwards say that, you know, they were sort of part of the war machine, which they're certainly not.
And we shouldn't forget, of course, that Hamas did spark the initial attacks by abducting and killing so many people on October the 7th.
Absolutely. I mean, this horror date, which will be sort of burned into all of our minds, October 7th, will be sort of the terrible, terrible reminder that Jewish life, Israeli lives can be attacked. And I would hope, you know, that all the political forces that are in power would try to find diplomatic solutions for these conflicts, which have now escalated to a point where it's very difficult to actually see diplomatic solutions.
A slight glimmer of good news out of Russia, not for the country itself, but for one political prisoner. Tell us about Vladimir Kara-Murza.
So Vladimir Kara-Murza was the sort of almost most important political prisoner in Russia after Alexei Navalny was killed in February 2024. And Kara-Murza was exchanged on August 1st now. He was one of those, next to Ilya Yashin and others, who were exchanged against Putin's sort of cronies that he wanted to have back. So we get human rights activists back here in the West, which is a really good thing. And although people were a bit worried that it might lead to blackmailing, having these exchanges being done, I have to say yesterday when I saw Vladimir Kara-Murza, who gave a press conference at RUSI here, the think tank in London, and you saw a man so focused and so full of ideas and energy in order, first of all now, to highlight the fate of other political prisoners in Russia and in Belarus, because there are thousands of people in his situations which are squeezed into little cells in prison camps in solitary confinement, who have no way to, call home and speak to their children, and are being sentenced to prison colony jail terms of, in his case, he was sentenced to 25 years for criticizing the war in the Ukraine. So it's outrageous. And he's free now. And his problem, of course, now will also be how to influence the situation in Russia from here, because exiled Russian politicians always have a problem to reach home, because they can easily be painted as Western agents once they're out. And so he's sort of trying also to get, after 6 weeks now, it's a little bit too early, but he'll have to try to bring the Russian opposition a little bit together and to see how people can get organized to fight Putin from abroad.
And also, of course, he's got to be extremely careful, because while it might not be an exploding device, we know that Russia has operated on British soil, targeting people that they think are unfriendly to their regime.
Absolutely. And he has experienced that on his own body, because he had been poisoned twice by the FSB. He was very, very active in the personalized sanction regime attempts that were set up, the so-called Magnitsky Act. For years, he was also a very close associate and friend of Boris Nemtsov. All of these people who are dead now because they sort of criticized Putin's regime. So he is in intense danger. But what I always find incredible when you see Russian opposition politicians and activists and human rights activists, also journalists, speaking to us, what courage they have and what spine in that they are sort of sitting up and saying we cannot let our country be ruled by thugs and the kleptocracy and also this criminal regime and this totalitarian attempt also to, annex, to have wars against the neighbors and not to accept that Russia has to also live in the 21st century as just one country among others that cannot just rule whatever they want.
Tessa, thank you very much indeed. We'll be back with you, but first we're going to head to Amsterdam. Over this weekend, the city of Amsterdam is celebrating the 5th edition of Glue, a 4-day design festival that links the many makers based in the city. One route connects all the locations and offers designers the opportunity to meet with one another, as well as giving the public the rare chance to see behind the scenes of the studios, workshops and artistic practices across the metropolis. At Hotel Arena near the Oosterpark in Amsterdam, one of the many hubs dotted across the city, Monocle's Mae-Li caught up with Glue co-founder Janine de Jong and began by asking how the festival started.
5 years ago, the three of us, I'm the co-founder, the two others, David Held and Guus van Maarschalke-Weert. We have a real broad network, and a lot of people in the network always asked us, why isn't there anything about design in the capital, in Amsterdam? And on the other hand, we really noticed and experienced that the creatives and the designers in Amsterdam don't know each other, and no one knows how much creativity there is in Amsterdam. We are a creative city, but that's as a whole. But the individuals, people don't know it. You have like in Eindhoven a lot, in Rotterdam, but not yet in Amsterdam. So we really started low-key, and we asked some people like, what do you think about connecting design in Amsterdam and putting you on a stage? And everyone said, oh, I'd like to have it yesterday. Of course, we needed to start thinking about, okay, how are we going to call it? What's the purpose of the event? And Glue says it all, because it's about connecting people with each other, about connecting with the world, showing who you are, what you can, what you have, what you would like to reach. Yeah, that's really how it started and why we started it, especially.
And one thing that struck me from looking at the lineup for the design route is how it's making the most of the existing design studios and makers based in the city. It's not a case of like a lot of the design events happening across the calendar of, bringing lots of people in who maybe don't have a connection to the city already, maybe showcasing a project and then jetting back home. This is very much about the makers, the creatives who are located here, who have a real connection to the city. Why was it so important to focus on that rather than, all this extra talent from elsewhere?
I think it's already beautiful the way you say it, because that's exactly how we meant it. We really started it for Amsterdam. We weren't really aiming to have it like an international event, because I think if you start with that, you're not really, from the center. And now we're noticing that people from outside are getting interested. If we start to invite people all around the world, we're doing a bit the same as we're doing with fairs. And that's not what we are doing, but we want people to be interested around the world in what we are doing, hoping a bit that people are going to organize it in their own city. We were visiting all these fairs for years, and all these people were brought into big buildings with all their stuff, and a few days later it's all taken out. And we thought people in their own space, they are much more beautiful, it's much more authentic, and it's much more real. They can really tell the stories. And the nice thing is that they like to open the doors for others as well. So you get real interesting connections already in a studio, in a showroom, in a gallery.
Have you seen any sort of fruits from early meetings or collaborations that have happened because of those meetings at previous events or connections made?
Yeah, really. We know from now, like last evening, we had the kickoff and people come to me and they said, I'm so happy that Glue is happening again, because last year I met this and this person and we made this collaboration and now we're going to present it. We started, with all these dots in Amsterdam. And then the second year, everyone was so happy that something was happening that we were really overwhelmed with people who wanted to join. But then we had all these dots in Amsterdam and people who started visiting it, they were like, where do I start? So sometimes you really overrate your own concept as well a little bit. And then we were like, okay, we thought we have an event for professionals. There's a need for it. But then all of a sudden, if there is too much you show, people get paralyzed. So now what we learned is that we need to take people by the hand and we make this route on like a theme or a subject or an interest of a visitor. And people can go really purposed to the event and see what they want to see. And from there, the funny thing again is if they are somewhere and they get to chat to each other, people tell them, oh, if you like this, it might be nice to visit, the other route as well, because you're going to see that and that. And that, therefore, people are getting out of their comfort zone and see new things. But this is the way, so we really need to take them by the hand and help them a little bit.
That was Janine de Jong, co-founder of Glue there, speaking to our Mae-Li Evans. And the event continues until the end of Sunday across Amsterdam. This is Monocle on Saturday on Monocle Radio with me, Georgina Godwin, and still with me is Tessa Szyszkowitz, the Austrian journalist and author. Tessa, it is a party conference season here in Britain, and you're off to Liverpool to the Labour Party conference. Now, I wonder what they're going to be wearing. And
Me too.
It's a relevant question, right?
It absolutely is a relevant question. We've been gripped by the saga in the last days. How many donations Keir Starmer and Lady Starmer and also Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, have accepted from donors to boost their appearances. And I have to say, I'm really in split mind here, because on the one hand, of course, it's much easier if people who also have good middle-class salaries go and buy their own clothes and don't get in any of these debates, because it looks a little clumsy from the point of view of viewers and potential voters to see how they struggle now to declare or not declare after 28 days a dress that was chosen by a special sort of stylist for Lady Vic, who actually doesn't really need it because she's a well-dressed first lady, as we could see in the last month. So the whole thing is a little bit of an unnecessary stumble now in front before the Labour Party conference. But on the other hand, you could use this so well to say, to promote, for example, young British designers and say, like, declare that you sort of have a dress or a gown for these endless galas these people have to go to, and say, like, this is by a young upcoming British designer, and then afterwards it goes back, and it will help British industry in a way. It could be a really nice playing field for good purpose things and support of design and fashion. British, Vivienne Westwood is on our minds, and there should be her successors now also being celebrated. But instead we're in this rather petty debate about who declares what, when and how.
And it just seems extraordinary when you look back at the last government, the Conservatives, who took so much, who it seems to me at any rate were extremely corrupt in many ways. And this is something that nobody tried to hide. It was an oversight, it would appear. And now, of course, Starmer has said nobody will accept anything. That's the end to freebies.
Yeah, that's what they now decided in order to sort of to get over with this debate. But, it's also strange because you had very wealthy prime ministers now from the Conservative Party side. And of course, the wife of Rishi Sunak did not discuss getting donations from some from clothes, because she can do what she wants. She's wealthy enough. And of course, similar with David Cameron and his wife Samantha, who also, could do their own. We're not bothered by any of these kind of money or budget debates. Yeah? We had a lot of this Boris Johnson and Kerry discussion on a golden wallpaper that I think never existed, but it gave you at the time the feeling that these are sort of it always falls now on the left, supposedly working class representatives in government who then get into this trouble. But if you look back, for example, on Tony Blair's wife, Cherie, in her memoirs in 2012, was talking about how they found a good way of dealing with this sort of closed debate and stylist debate and how much can a hairdresser cost, because we do expect the representatives to look kind of styled and elegant. And if you see Emmanuel Macron and Brigitte appear, it's sort of, that's a very special, it's like a design show. Yeah. So maybe the English have never been as accustomed to this type of very stylish appearances, but to try a little bit to make it also fun for everyone is not a bad thing at all. You just have to have rules that then apply what you actually, rent your gown and give it back. That's, in my view, the best way to deal with it.
How do people deal with it in Austria? You've got an election coming up this weekend. Will people be dressed by leading designers?
I mean, we really don't have much of this debate. You know how sad sometimes the German-Austrian sort of lands are in this respect. And, remember that Angela Merkel, for example, she used to dress almost every day in the same suit, just with a different touch of color. So it was always block color, but it was either pink or light blue. And then she did wear twice the same outfit, a gown for Bayreuth, for the Wagner Festival, and people were really shocked. And in the end, she was actually a trendsetter, because nowadays in sustainable, when you want to be more sustainable in your clothes and your dressing and fashion and all this, you should actually wear the same robe if they fit you, if you feel comfortable in them. Just do it one more time. And in Austria, we don't have a lot of this debate, to be honest. And people wear sort of, their suits and come to debates in rather sort of average clothes. And the question will be if that's at all decisive now, because Sunday in a week, in the 29th of September, we have elections. And since we had great floods last week, sort of the threat of the far-right party winning big has diminished a little bit. So the latest polls show that the Conservatives, who had to deal as a government with the floods, have caught up a little bit. And the Green Party also, which shouldn't come as a surprise, since we saw with the floods that there's a sort of man-made climate catastrophe in the making. And it's not to be, you can't deny it anymore if you look out of the window.
What about the German regional elections?
Yeah, that's tomorrow, Brandenburg. And that's a real sort of also very difficult situation that the German government, the so-called Ampel coalition out of Social Democrats, Greens and Liberals are in, because the AfD is really gnawing, coming closer and closer, and partly overtaking the Social Democrats or the CDU, the Conservatives, in these regions. So Brandenburg, which till now has a SPD prime minister, is looking at an AfD on second place in the opinion polls, and that will make it even more difficult for Chancellor Olaf Scholz, who already now is under pressure, and some people are saying he shouldn't even be the candidate for the next national elections, because he cannot get his politics out to the voters, and they tend to go to the far right now, at least in some of these formerly East German provinces.
I want to go back, though, to what First Ladies are wearing, or rather, in this case, more pertinently, what they're not wearing, because Melania Trump is promoting her forthcoming memoir, and she talks about that her nude modelling, the nude pictures that surfaced of her. She did it twice, I think, the second time on Donald Trump's plane. She's proud of them, and she's just offering a defence of that.
Well, so she is proud of her nude pictures, but she does not show us her nude pictures, obviously, now that she's sort of competing to be, for a second time, First Lady in the White House. But her memoir, which is also a little bit shrouded in mystery, we have to say, because if you look at it, how it looks, it's rather bland and black and white, just saying Melania. But she has said that we should be very proud of nude pictures, and it's really mean that the left wing always pulls out her naked pictures in elections campaign again and again, because we should see how art history has always featured naked images. For example, as she mentions, Michelangelo's statue of David, which is a very nice moment when you come to Florence to see it. So she shows that in her promotional videos now on X or other social media. But the interesting thing, of course, is that she has been rather absent now in this election campaign, just appearing briefly at the Republican Party convention in July. But now that she's sort of rather not in the picture and doesn't seem to care to appear next to her husband, who was just convicted for paying hush money to a porn star that he slept with. So it seems that it's a little bit awkward, this whole campaign, for her promotional videos, and not being in the political scheme, but sort of attacking, of course, the left-wing press of portraying her as a naked model somewhere in Donald Trump's planes.
Well, of course, one thing it will do is make her a lot of money, I expect. Like her husband, Melania is turning into a business opportunity. And let's talk about business, because 2024 marks the 20th edition of the Financial Times Business Book of the Year Award, which celebrates the books providing the most compelling and enjoyable insight into modern business issues, from globalization to AI. Well, Andrew Hill is a senior business writer at the Financial Times. He's led the award since its inception. And he joins us now. Thank you very much for coming on Monocle Radio, Andrew. Tell me the rationale behind setting up this prize.
Well, back in 2005, when we did the first edition, I think the rationale was the same, if you like, as what the Financial Times does day to day, which is curate a lot of information for very busy people. And in our back of our minds was the thought that there are a lot of business books published every year. Some estimates say 10,000 in the US. That's the biggest market. And we needed to have a filter of some sort to allow the same busy people who read the FT to choose the best ones.
And so what's the criteria? What turns out to be the best?
Well, the crucial thing at the outset, and I wasn't directly responsible for this, it was a former colleague of mine who suggested the enjoyable part was important, because, let's face it, some business books, even well thought of business books, can be pretty worthy and hard to get through. So that has turned out to be almost as important as the most compelling part. We've also had a sort of subcategory or subcriterion of books that stand the test of time, which is now an official part of the rules. And of course, that's almost impossible to tell in the moment. But I'm pretty happy with the way the judges have picked their winners. I think all 19 so far are books that have stood the test of time pretty well.
That shortlist was announced on Tuesday. Can you give us a flavour of it?
Sure. Well, it reflects to some degree the preoccupations of the moment. There's a book about AI by Parmi Olsen called Supremacy, about the battle between Demis Hassabis of Google DeepMind and Sam Altman of OpenAI, and behind them between Google itself and Microsoft. There's a book about Silicon Valley and defense, Unit X. There are books about longevity, about the state of the corporation in a world of digitization and service-led economies. There's a book about good growth. And there's a book coming out next month, in fact, called Tribal, about how we might harness our tribal instincts rather than using them to divide ourselves, by Michael Morris, which I think is very timely.
And when books are shortlisted, or indeed when they win, are you seeing a corresponding jump in sales for those books?
We don't monitor that. From time to time, I take a look at things like Amazon rankings on the day before we announce and the day after, and there obviously is a bump. It's a bit hard to make that direct connection, because some of the books are already bestsellers when we pick them, and others, like Tribal this year, have not yet been published when we put them on the shortlist. But yes, I think that most publishers say they get a bump, and that's reflected also in the way in which they then rebrand their books or make sure that their books are publicised as being on the long list or the short list or winners of the prize. I always like to see a paperback of a winner in the stores with winner of the FT Business Book of the Year Award stamped on its cover.
And when will the winner be announced?
So we get together in December. The judges will pick a winner at the beginning of December, and it's announced in London on December the 9th.
Thank you very much, Andrew Hill. The 2024 winner of the Financial Times Schroders Business Book of the Year award, as Andrew says, will be announced on the 9th of December. And that's all for this edition of Monocle on Saturday. Thanks to our producer and our studio engineer, Mariella Bevan, and many thanks to my guests, Andrew Hill, as we've just heard, and Tessa Szyszkowitz. Monocle on Saturday returns at the same time next weekend. I'm Georgina Godwin. Thank you for listening.